There is something inside you that you have been protecting for years. You call it your identity. You call it your personality. You call it who you are. But what if I told you that the very thing you are guarding so carefully, the beliefs you defend, the self-image you maintain, the story you tell yourself every morning, is not your power? What if it is your cage? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most dangerous minds in the history of human thought, did not come to comfort you. He did not come to help you optimize your habits or improve your morning routine. He came with a hammer, and his most radical, most terrifying, most liberating idea was not about God, not about morality, not about power over others. It was about this: you must destroy yourself first. Not the weak parts, not just the bad habits. Everything, the whole constructed edifice of who you think you are, must come down before something real can stand in its place. Most people will turn this off before we get there. The ego will find a reason. It will call this too extreme, too dark, too much. But you are still here, which means some part of you already knows that what you have been building on is not solid ground. Let's begin with the question you have been avoiding. Who told you who you are? Think carefully. Your name was given to you. Your religion was assigned to you. Your values were installed before you had the cognitive capacity to question them. Your fears were inherited from parents who inherited them from their parents. The personality you walk around presenting to the world, that curated, defended, emotionally charged identity, was shaped by teachers who barely knew you, by a culture that needed you to be predictable, by a childhood that demanded you adapt to survive. Nietzsche called this the herd, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. The herd needs stable members. Society needs you to stay legible, manageable, categorizable. And so from the very beginning, the training begins. Don't be too loud. Don't want too much. Don't contradict. Don't disturb. Conform. And you did. You had to. You were a child and you needed to survive in a world you didn't choose. But you are not a child anymore. And the problem is that the identity built for survival in childhood becomes the prison of adulthood. You have grown into the cage, and now you call the cage yourself. You feel it most acutely in moments of tension, when someone challenges your beliefs and you feel a surge of irrational anger, not because they are wrong, but because you don't know who you are without that belief. When you consider a change of direction in life and a cold fear grips you. Not fear of failure, but fear of no longer being recognizable to yourself. When you look at the version of you that you know you could become, and instead of excitement, you feel only the weight of everything you would have to abandon to get there. That weight is not wisdom. It is the ego in full defensive mode, protecting an image that was never truly you. Nietzsche understood this with terrifying clarity. He saw that most people live their entire lives as a performance for parents long dead, for peers who are too absorbed in their own performance to watch yours, for a society that will replace you the moment you become inconvenient. He called this the life of the last man, comfortable, warm, mediocre, and utterly without meaning. The last man blinks. The last man does not create. The last man maintains. And the tragedy is not that the last man is unhappy. The tragedy is that the last man has stopped asking whether there is something more. Are you the last man, or is there something in you that still believes it was built for fire? The reason you haven't destroyed yourself yet is not cowardice, it is architecture. The self is not a simple thing. It is a fortress, and like all fortresses, it was built in response to threats. Nietzsche identified the deepest structural threat to the self-constructed identity and called it slave morality. This is where his philosophy becomes dangerous, because he was not talking about slaves in chains. He was talking about you. Slave morality is the psychological system that emerges when people feel powerless. When you cannot impose your will on your environment, you stop trying to change the world and start redefining weakness as virtue. Humility becomes sacred, not because humility is genuinely wise, but because ambition feels too dangerous. Conformity becomes loyalty, mediocrity becomes community, suffering becomes nobility, and the person who refuses to shrink, who dares to want more, who insists on becoming something different, that person becomes the threat. They are called arrogant, selfish, unstable. They are told they have lost themselves. But Nietzsche asks the deeper question: which self did they lose? The one imposed on them from the outside? If so, losing that self is not a crisis, it is a beginning. The ego resists this insight with extraordinary sophistication. It does not argue with you directly, it works through emotion. It makes you feel that questioning your identity is the same as destroying yourself, that to examine your beliefs is to betray them, that to consider a radically different version of your life is to abandon everyone who loves you. These are not logical arguments, they are survival mechanisms dressed as moral imperatives. Carl Jung, who understood this same dynamic through a different lens, called it identification with the persona, the mask you wear to function in society, slowly fusing to your face until you can no longer tell where the mask ends and you begin. And here is what nobody tells you: society is not neutral about this process. Society actively rewards the fused mask. It gives you approval for staying legible. It gives you belonging for staying predictable. Every social reinforcement, every nod of recognition from your tribe, every comfortable moment of being understood, all of it is the system paying you to stay inside the cage. The salary of your imprisonment is the comfort of being known. This is the anatomy of comfortable collapse. You do not fall dramatically, you settle slowly. You make one small compromise after another, each perfectly reasonable on its own, until one day you look in the mirror and the person looking back is someone who has never truly chosen anything, someone who has only ever responded, someone who calls his conditioning his character. Now ask yourself honestly, in how many areas of your life are you currently making choices from genuine values, and in how many are you simply executing the program that was installed in you before you were old enough to object? Write that answer in the comments, not for me, for you, because the gap between those two numbers is the exact size of the self you still need to destroy. We have to talk about what destruction actually feels like, because this is the part every motivational voice skips. It is not clean. It is not dramatic in the way movies portray transformation. It does not happen in a single moment of clarity. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, love of fate, is perhaps the most misunderstood idea in all of his philosophy. People read it as passive acceptance, as a kind of spiritual surrender to whatever happens. It is the opposite. Amor fati means loving your fate so completely that you would choose every single moment of it again, including and especially the moments that destroyed you. The illness, the rejection, the failure so total that it redefined your floor, the relationship that ended and took half of your identity with it, the career that collapsed, the version of yourself you were forced to abandon because circumstances left you no choice. Nietzsche is asking you to look at those moments, the ones you have been running from, the ones you have been quietly ashamed of, the ones you carefully edit out of the story you tell about yourself, and see them not as interruptions to your life, but as the most important chapters in it. He wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," but the popular understanding of that line is superficial. It is not about surviving difficulty and emerging intact. It is about surviving difficulty and emerging different, fundamentally altered, the old self genuinely gone, a new architecture built from the wreckage. Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher who haunted Nietzsche's entire philosophical imagination, said that you cannot step into the same river twice. The river is always changing, but Nietzsche added the harder insight: you cannot step into the same river twice because you are also always changing. The question is whether that change is happening consciously, by your design, through deliberate acts of self-overcoming, or whether it is happening to you, by default, through accumulated reaction to circumstances you never examined. The pain of destruction is real. I am not asking you to minimize it. When you begin to question the foundations of your identity, your beliefs about what you deserve, your assumptions about what is possible, the stories you have told yourself to explain why your life looks the way it does, it feels like grief, because it is grief. You are mourning a version of yourself. You are attending the funeral of a story. And unlike conventional grief, nobody will bring flowers. The people around you may not even notice. They may react with confusion or hostility, because when you change, you implicitly challenge everyone who chose not to. The herd does not celebrate the wolf who learns to run. It tries to call the wolf back. To thank you for staying here through this, because most people stopped reading long before this point, and the fact that you are still present means something. It means the part of you that is ready to do this is stronger than the part that wants to retreat. What is coming next is the part that changes everything, the actual mechanism of self-overcoming that Nietzsche spent his entire life trying to articulate. This is where it stops being philosophy and starts being surgery. Nietzsche's will to power is the most misrepresented concept in the history of ideas. People hear those words and they think of domination, of conquest, of stepping on others to reach the top. This interpretation is not just wrong, it is the exact opposite of what Nietzsche meant. The will to power, at its core, is not about power over others, it is about power over yourself. It is the drive to grow, to create, to overcome resistance, internal resistance, the resistance of the undeveloped self, the resistance of habit and comfort and inherited belief. It is the force that makes an artist destroy a painting that is technically correct but emotionally empty and start again. It is the force that makes a person walk away from a life that looks successful from the outside because they know, in a place deeper than words, that it is not theirs. To become what you are, Nietzsche's command issued without sentiment, you must first do the uncomfortable work of identifying what you are not. And this requires a kind of radical honesty that most people never attempt. Start here. What beliefs are you currently holding that you have never chosen, not examined and kept, actually chosen after genuine questioning? The ones that feel like absolute truth, but live in the emotional layer rather than the logical one. The ones where disagreement doesn't prompt curiosity, it prompts anger. Those beliefs are not yours. They were installed, and they are holding the shape of a self that someone else needed you to be. Then, go deeper. What role are you currently playing that you stepped into because it was expected, not because it was true? The dutiful child, the responsible one, the person who doesn't make trouble, the one who always has it together, the one who sacrifices. These roles can be so deeply fused to identity that questioning them feels like moral failure. But Nietzsche would say that the most immoral thing you can do is to spend your entire life performing a character that was written for you by someone else. Then the hardest layer, what do you want? Not what you should want, not what would make people respect you, not what would finally earn the approval you have been chasing since childhood. What do you actually want? When you strip away every layer of conditioning and social performance and fear. For most people, this question is almost unanswerable at first because they have spent so long managing the external performance that the internal signal has become very quiet. The Nietzschean process of self-destruction is the process of deliberately creating enough silence to hear that signal again. It means removing systematically the noise, the relationships that require you to diminish yourself to be accepted, the environments that only function if you remain static, the habits that protect the old self by ensuring you never have too much space to think, the identities that feel comfortable specifically because they have stopped demanding growth. Each removal will hurt, each one will feel like loss, But Nietzsche distinguishes between destruction that leaves emptiness and destruction that creates space. What you are doing is not nihilistic emptying. You are burning the scaffolding so the real structure can be seen. Joseph Campbell, who translated these themes into mythological language, called it the hero's journey, the necessary descent into the underworld, the death of the old self, the difficult return as something transformed. But Campbell was describing something Nietzsche demanded, not as a narrative arc for stories, as a daily practice for living. The Übermensch, the Overman, is not a destination you arrive at. It is a direction you choose every morning against the resistance of everything you have already built. The man who is becoming is always more dangerous, more alive, more real than the man who has arrived. Now we arrive at the final and most powerful idea, the one that Nietzsche himself said only the strongest minds could hold without flinching: the eternal recurrence. Imagine that you will live your life again, exactly as it has been, an infinite number of times. Every choice you made, every compromise, every moment of cowardice, every time you chose comfort over truth, every time you silenced yourself to keep the peace, every time you looked at the version of yourself you could become and chose instead to protect the version you already were. You will live it all again, infinitely. Now the question changes, not how do I improve, not what should I do differently, but can I live so fully, so authentically, so in alignment with what I actually am, that I would choose this life again, every single time, without revision. This is the eternal recurrence as Nietzsche intended it, not as a cosmological theory, but as a psychological weapon, a test of the highest severity, because the man who has been living someone else's life cannot pass this test. He knows in the marrow of his bones that he would not choose it again, that given the chance, he would want to revise, to correct, to finally become the thing he avoided being. But the man who has done the work of destruction, who has burned the false self, who has grieved the comfortable story, who has rebuilt on the foundation of genuine values, deliberately chosen, that man can face the eternal recurrence and say yes. And that yes is not resignation, it is power in its purest form. The paradox that Nietzsche leaves you with is this: the man who can destroy himself cannot be destroyed by anything else. If you have already done the most difficult thing, looked at your own foundations and chosen consciously to demolish them, then rejection cannot break you, failure cannot define you, abandonment cannot hollow you out. What are they taking from you? A version of yourself you already chose to kill. You are already ash, and from ash you build. The majority of people who begin this process stop before it is complete. They dismantle a few comfortable beliefs, feel the discomfort of the exposure, and quickly rebuild the walls slightly modified, telling themselves they have transformed when they have only redecorated. Real destruction is rarer. Real destruction is when you sit in the rubble without immediately reaching for familiar materials, when you tolerate the unstructured period between the old self and the new one, when you resist the social pressure to become legible again before you have become real. This period, the interval between death and rebirth, is the most critical and most dangerous. It is where most people fail, not because they are weak, but because everything around them is designed to prevent it. Society needs you to recohere quickly, to find your role, to settle back into something that can be categorized. The people who love you will often, with the best intentions, try to hand you back the old pieces. Here is what you were before. Come back to this. We knew you when you were this. Nietzsche says, do not take the pieces back. The man who reassembles the old self out of social pressure has not transformed. He has merely interrupted the process and added shame to the equation. You must be willing to be unknown to yourself and to others for as long as the rebuilding requires. And when you emerge, the power you carry will be different in kind, not just in degree, from anything the protected, defended, comfortable self was ever capable of generating, because it will be yours, chosen, forged, undeniable. So here is the question I leave you with, not a rhetorical question, a real one. Take it somewhere quiet and actually answer it. If you were to apply Nietzsche's hammer to your life right now, if you were to identify the single most protected belief, the most defended identity, the most comfortable cage, what would it be? And are you brave enough to touch it? The man who can answer that question honestly is already beginning the only transformation that matters. The rest is just noise. Most people will not apply this. They will find it fascinating for a few minutes and then return to the ordinary maintenance of a self they never chose. But you were still here, which means the hammer is already in your hand. What you do with it is entirely and terrifyingly yours to decide. If the idea of destroying yourself to become real feels more like a call than a concept, leave it in the comments. Tell me what part of yourself you have been refusing to touch. The conversation there is more honest than anywhere else. Subscribe if this is the kind of thinking you want more of, and when you are ready for the next confrontation, it is already waiting.